She was 17 years old, just 17. She stood at the edge of a grass airfield in Kyiv, gripping the frame of a fragile glider, her school uniform still pressed from the morning. The year was 1940. The war hadn't reached Ukraine yet. The sky above her was clean and blue and enormous. She looked up at it the way most 17-year-old girls look up at the sky, like it was something beautiful, not a battlefield, not a graveyard, just sky. Her name was Natalya Meklin. And within 2 years, that same sky would be the place where she flew more than 800 night combat missions over the Eastern Front, in a canvas airplane without a parachute, straight into the guns of the German Wehrmacht. She was not yet 22 when she finished. Natalya Fyodorovna Meklin was born on September 8, 1922, in Lubny, in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Her family was working class. Her childhood was ordinary in the way that Soviet children's childhoods were ordinary, shaped by collective ideals, by school, by the idea that the state and its future was something worth building. She grew up in Smyla, then Kharkov, then Kyiv, cities full of industry, argument, and possibility. She was bright, restless. She graduated from her 10th grade schooling in Kyiv in 1940, and the moment she was done, she didn't celebrate. She walked directly to the Kyiv Young Pioneer Palace and enrolled in the glider school there. Nobody told her to, nobody pushed her. She simply wanted to fly. That is the detail history rarely pauses on. She chose aviation before the war chose her. That matters, because the woman who would later become one of the most decorated combat pilots in Soviet history didn't stumble into the cockpit. She ran toward it. At 17, before anyone called her a hero, before anyone called her anything at all, she enrolled at the Moscow Aviation Institute in 1941. She was 18. The world she had planned was still intact. And then it wasn't. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border in the largest land invasion in the history of warfare. The attack came before dawn, without declaration, without warning. Entire divisions were destroyed in the first hours. Airfields were bombed before pilots could reach their planes. The Soviet Air Force lost over 1,000 aircraft on the first day alone. Cities burned. Columns of refugees choked the roads west of Moscow. Natalya Meklin was in Moscow when the bombs started falling. She was at the Aviation Institute, studying flight mechanics, reading technical manuals, building a career in peacetime aviation. In a single morning, that career ceased to exist. The occupation moved fast. German forces advanced through Ukraine with terrifying speed. Kyiv fell in September 1941 after a siege that killed or captured over 500,000 Soviet soldiers. The cities where Natalya had grown up, Smyla, Kharkov, were occupied one by one. People she had known were living under German rule. Some of them were being shot in the streets. She was 19 years old, and she was furious. In October 1941, Marina Raskova changed everything. Raskova was the Soviet Union's most famous female aviator, a record setter, a national hero, a woman who had personally petitioned Joseph Stalin for the right to form all-female combat aviation regiments. Stalin said yes. Order number 099 was issued on October 8, 1941. 3 women's air regiments would be formed. One of them would fly night harassment bombing missions. Natalya Meklin read the announcement and applied the same week. She was accepted. She was sent to Engels Military Aviation School in the city of Engels on the Volga River. There, hundreds of young women, navigators, pilots, mechanics, trained in compressed time. The curriculum that would normally take years was compressed into months. They trained in winter. They trained through illness. They trained on aircraft that were already considered obsolete. The Polikarpov Po-2 biplane, later redesignated the Po-2, was a 1928 crop-dusting design, canvas and steel wire, an open cockpit, no armor, no radar, no radio in many early configurations. It could carry 350 kilograms of bombs. That was all. It flew at roughly 90 kilometers per hour, slower than a stalling German Messerschmitt Bf 1009, which made it uniquely difficult to shoot down, but also uniquely easy to kill with anti-aircraft fire, searchlights or flak. The pilots who flew it did not carry parachutes. Until 1944, the weight of the bombs made parachutes impossible. Natalya Meklin trained, graduated, and shipped to the front in spring 1942. She was 19. She had never fired a weapon in anger. She had never seen a man die. She did not yet know what she was walking into. She found out on June 12, 1942, when the 58th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment flew its first combat sorties over the Meuse River. The Germans never expected women. That was the first weapon. The 58th Regiment arrived at the southern front, and the Wehrmacht simply could not compute it. Their intelligence reports mentioned a harassment bomber unit operating at night. The planes were small, slow, almost silent. They flew low, impossibly low, skimming treetops, following river courses, avoiding detection by flying in the gaps between searchlight beams. The pilots had memorized the terrain from maps. They navigated by the stars, by the shape of rivers, by fires burning on the steppe below them. Meklin flew first as a navigator for Maria Smirnova, then for Irina Sabrova. She studied every mission, every angle, every approach. She lobbed the searchlight positions over the Caucasus. She memorized the rhythm of German anti-aircraft fire, where they clustered their guns, how long it took them to reload, which approaches they guarded least. She was building a mental map of how to survive. The technique the regiment developed was terrifying in its audacity. Flights of 3 aircraft would approach a target together. 2 planes would draw the searchlights and the flak. They would split, forcing the beams and guns to divide. In the gap, in the brief dark moment between the beams swinging apart, the 3rd plane would cut her engine completely. She would glide in silence. No engine, no radio, no nothing. Just wind. Just the creak of canvas wings. Just the darkness. The Germans heard a sound like a broomstick in the wind. They started calling them Benachthexen, the Night Witches. On May 18, 1943, Natalya Meklin flew her 81st mission, and for the first time, she flew it as the pilot. Not the navigator, the pilot. She was 20 years old. By that point, she had flown over 200 combat sorties from the back seat. Now she took the controls. She did not stop. The missions multiplied through 1943 and into 1944. The Caucasus, the Kuban, the brutal fighting over the Taman Peninsula. The regiment earned the Guards designation in February 1943 and was renamed the 46 Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. Then came the Crimean Offensive, 6,140 sorties for the regiment in that campaign alone. Meklin flew her share of every single one. Meklin flew into the Battle of Novorossiysk. She flew over the Kerch Strait at night, in winter, navigating by moonlight across dark water toward German shore batteries. She flew over Poland in 1944, when the Wehrmacht was retreating and the flak was, if anything, denser and more desperate than before. She flew into searchlight beams that could blind her. She flew through anti-aircraft bursts that punched holes in canvas wings. She flew with frostbite. She flew 800 sorties, then 840. On February 23, 1945, the Supreme Soviet of the USSR issued the decree. Natalya Meklin, first lieutenant of the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. The citation listed 840 combat sorties and 147 tons of bombs dropped on enemy positions. On March 8, 1945, Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky personally presented her with the Gold Star Medal somewhere in Poland, with the guns of the Eastern Front audible in the distance. She was 22 years old. She kept flying. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, her total mission count stood at approximately 980 night combat sorties. Almost 1,000 times she had flown into German-controlled airspace in the dark, cut her engine, glided toward the target in silence, released her bombs, and pulled away into the night. Almost 1,000 times she had survived. Not everyone did. 32 members of the regiment died during the war. Pilots who had trained alongside Meklin, navigated beside her, laughed with her during the brief hours between missions. Gone. Yevdokia Nosal, Vera Belik, Tatiana Makarova, Yevgenia Rudneva, Olga Sanfirova. Their names fill the memorial pages of the regiment's history. Their empty seats at the briefing table were not discussed. The missions continued the following night regardless. Meklin flew. She kept flying. She understood perhaps better than most, that stopping was not an option. The math was simple and brutal. Every night she didn't fly, someone else had to. Every target she didn't hit remained intact. The war did not pause for grief, but grief came anyway. It settled into the bones and stayed there. After the war, Natalya Meklin became a reserve officer in October 1945. She enrolled at Moscow State University. Then she re-enlisted in 1947. From 1948 to 1957, she studied at the Military Institute of Foreign Languages and worked afterward as a translator, a woman who had spent 3 years flying through darkness over burning ground, now quietly turning words from one language into another. She became a writer. In 1972, she joined the Union of Soviet Writers. Schools were named after her in Smolensk, Poltava, Stavropol. In the last years of her life, she co-authored a book with her former regiment colleague, Irina Rakobolskaya. The book's title, in Russian, translates as this: We Were Called Night Witches. She died in Moscow on June 5, 2005. She was 82 years old. She was buried at Troyekurovskoye Cemetery. The girl who stood at the edge of a Kyiv airfield in 1940, pressing her hands against a glider frame, looking up at a sky that still seemed clean, had flown nearly 1,000 missions into that same sky when it was full of fire and flak and the sound of aircraft falling. She flew 980 times into the dark. She came home 900 times. And she spent the rest of her long life making sure the world knew the names of the women who did not. Sorties, awarded Hero of the Soviet Union on February 23, 1945 for 830 documented sorties. Died June 5, 2005, Moscow.